Hey there, it's Joe Johnson, host of Beetle Brunch, and we've got a lot going on, including our brand new redesigned website. So I hope you hop on to brunchladio.com, check it out. You can listen to every Beetle Brunch on demand. You can go back in time with old Brown shows, news, interviews like you're going to see today, and so much more. So thanks for checking this out. Got a very special guest I met on the Flower Power Cruise and at Abbey Road in the River, and been a huge fan ever since. He engineered the concept of these musical lectures called Deconstructing the Beatles, where in the early cases at least, if we take an album, break it apart and show you everything and let you hear outtakes and audio and tell you stories on why they chose this and why they chose that. Just fantastic. And when I've seen him play these shows live, which is another feat, on the Flower Power Cruise, standing room only. So it's really fantastic to welcome him. Also, he's the co-host of the Fab Four Masterclass presentations with Kenneth Womack, who's an amazing author and a personality in his own right. So I've used up all your time. Scott Freyman, how are you, buddy? How you holding up?
I'm holding up great, and always great to be on the show.
Oh man, it's so awesome to see you and to see your room. Is this where we're seeing in the background? This is where you
This
do a
is
lot
actually
of your, right?
my basement. I'll give you a quick tour. So this is my little keyboard here.
Yeah.
During COVID, I picked up a new instrument, which is drums. So I've been practicing drums. Great way to get out frustrations.
Wow.
And then in the back there is a guitar signed by John and Paul.
Wow.
It was a gift from my wife. Now it was signed on the actual guitar, not a plate, in around 76. I'm very skeptical, although I have a plaque that says it's official, but I don't want to look too closely since it was a gift from my wife. So it is a guitar, as far as I know, signed by John and Paul.
Absolutely love it. It's great. In the background of my room, I have a picture of Ringo and Paul. I got Rockabilly Man, Carl Perkins. And then all the way to the right there is Elvis Presley. It's a ticket that he was never used because it was printed before he passed away.
Oh.
So, so I guess it's still good.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. If he ever comes back, well, he'll go on the hologram tour. Maybe you can use it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd hate for them to tear it in half, though. So, well, listen, we're celebrating George Harrison's birthday. He was born on February 25th, 1943. If you hear his sister Louise tell it, it was about 12:15 into the 25th. Sometimes people say the 24th, but for sure it was the 25th, 1943. And sadly, it's going to be 20 years this November that we lost him. And I remember where I was. I remember kind of being prepared for it, but it was certainly a sad day. So what we're going to do today is we're going to celebrate George. Now, on your Deconstructing the Beatles series, you have A Help and A Hard Day's Night coming out. Do you think eventually you'll deconstruct All Things Must Pass? Or some of the that's coming out this year.
We'll get there. Yeah, and I think, George, I would say out of the solo Beatles, George certainly had a falling off after, All Things Must Pass, Living in the Material World. And falling off meaning I think he just was losing interest. There are some great songs in there, but just not the quality of those earlier albums. But then he comes back at the very end with two fantastic albums, Cloud 9 and Brainwashed. So, I'd love to do a Deconstructing on Cloud 9 as well, or Brainwashed. They're both great albums. And then, of course, you have the whole Traveling Wilburys thing. I mean, one thing about George is he had so many facets to him. He wasn't just, a singer-songwriter. He had the race cars, the movies, the comedy, and he was just, by all accounts, just an all-around great fun guy to hang around with.
Yeah, I had a chance to interview Mrs. Harrison when the Concert for George was happening, or right after it came out on DVD, and we were talking about the funny comic bits that were in that show as well, and with Tom Hanks and the people from Monty Python, and we talked about that he just loved that. In fact, I think he kind of saved the franchise, right, when he invested.
He did invested in Life of Brian, yeah. And of course, he makes a great appearance in The Ruddles, so he was not beyond making fun of himself, right? And
I love the video of When We Was Fab, where you got the walk-bys with Ringo and Neil Aspinall and supposedly the Walrus, passing by.
Right.
You can deconstruct some videos there too.
Absolutely.
So let's start with George. When did he really become a fan of music? Was it like the rest of the Beatles, like 14 and just dive right in, or?
Right. So the story is that when he was young, I mean, remember he met John and Paul when he was, 16, 17, whatever. or even younger. He was apparently a good student, and then one day he was riding his bike and he heard Elvis Presley coming out of a house, Heartbreak Hotel, and that was it. And then his notebook started to be filled with pictures of guitars. He just was drawing guitars all the time. And when John met Paul, he was impressed by the fact that Paul not only could play really well, but he knew all these song lyrics. He could do the Little Richard. With George was this young kid, but he had memorized these and learned these great guitar licks from songs like Raunchy, which, without guitar teachers, without really having people you could go to learn, I mean, to pick that all up and do it by ear was pretty impressive. But he was always seen, and I think even through the Beatles, he was still perceived as the young guy, the kid.
Yeah.
And he just kept hanging around until he was eventually in the band.
Yeah, and it's, if you were to really analyze it over the whole tenure of the Beatles, each of these artists could have easily been a solo act on their own, even in those early days. I guess when Ringo would start writing music, but certainly George, he had a higher hill to climb with Lennon and McCartney. He could have jumped off at any passage along the way to the top of the hill with anybody else, but with those two guys, and then multiplied times two, right. It was crazy competition. So how did he wedge himself in, and how did he make himself stand out from those two crazy egomaniacs that we love?
Yeah, well, he really wasn't taken that seriously as a songwriter, but that changed over time, obviously, both by John and Paul, but also by George Martin, who didn't really give him the time of day.
Right.
And I think early on, with songs like Taxman, he was always turning to John and Paul for advice. I'm having trouble with the lyric. What do you think about this? Paul, would you play a guitar solo? Trying to bring them in. And, a lot of his frustration starting around the time of the White Album was really that he was trying to get the Beatles interested in his music, and John and Paul were all doing their own thing. But I think that, he had these mentors, and that really helped his songwriting, certainly. And I also think that up until Sgt. Pepper, he didn't need to write so much because John and Paul seemed to be doing fine on their own. They were turning out stuff. And maybe he felt, I don't really want to compete with that. So he only wrote 3 songs until Rubber Soul. Don't Bother Me, and then the 2 on Help, You Like Me Too Much, and I Need You. And they're all good songs. But then of course he gets into the Eastern music, and that was, if you look at what George's big contribution was to the Beatles, he was always the guy bringing in the new instruments. First it was new guitars, but then it was all the Eastern instruments, right? Not just the sitar, but the tambora and the Swarmandel. And by the time of Within You, Without You, when George Martin writes that amazing string arrangement with the Western strings matching up and kind of imitating the Eastern strings, that's a revolutionary time for popular music. I mean, that's really the birth, or certainly one of the origins of world music. And that's from George, George Harrison with a little help from George Martin on the arrangement.
And I think that Lennon and McCartney were very much appreciative of that, because they were, especially with Pepper and Revolver, they wanted to do something different. And even so, the top 40 Beatle fans might say that's weird music, but I think they all embraced it as, hey, we're being extra edgy here, and we're showing you where we can reach out across the world.
Yes, that's correct. And I think that there was this period where they were starting to say, hey, this is great. He's really he's adding a new element to the group. And then, of course, as we get into the White Album, where they're all kind of doing their own things, and he's contributing While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and is grabbing Paul for this song, or maybe John for that song. And then it starts to get a little hard, I think. I think for him, he felt like, okay, I'm a songwriter now. Mm-hmm. Most of All Things Must Pass was written in 68 and 69. And a lot of those songs were not only offered to the Beatles, but the Beatles had rehearsed them. it wasn't so much that the Beatles like didn't want to record All Things Must Pass. They spent a lot of time on it, but at the end, I think George just felt, they're not getting it, and I'll just keep it for something down the road, which turned out to be his album.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that there might have been a little bit of resentment on George's part for, spending so much time on Maxwell's Silver Hammer when I'm sitting here with All Things Must Pass and,
Yes.
Isn't It a Pity, and these other fantastic songs. And
Yeah.
so I don't blame him for wanting to go out and do his own thing. Do you, what would you say would be well, I know that the anthology included a song called You Know What to Do, and which was like an early Harrison kind of fumbling around. Don't Bother Me was, he always said was his response for people that were saying, when are you going to start writing music?
Right.
So what was the first really record that raised everybody's eyebrows and said, whoa?
Well, I like I Need You, but I think the first one that, you really start to see a difference, I think, is on Rubber Soul, with songs like Think for Yourself. It has some really interesting harmonies. It's a little different. And he always kind of had this angry edge to his songs, right? Don't Bother Me, Think for Yourself, the Taxman, the first political song the Beatles did really was Taxman. So by Revolver now, he's writing Taxman and I Want to Hold You, I want to Tell You, and then his first real Eastern song, Love You Too. And then, of course, Within You Out There we talked about. But, again, all good songs, but While My Guitar Gently Weeps for me is the one where it's like, wow, this is really a fantastic song,
So when you deconstruct the White Album, I mean, you obviously have to start with the acoustic version of While My Guitar, right? So how does it go from that to guitar solos with Clapton?
Yeah, so he's working on the song. I mean, we have demos of him playing on acoustic guitar. Paul sits in on harmonium, which is a pedal keyboard, but that's it. It's just the two of them. And he's doing takes, but John's doing his own thing, Paul's doing his own thing, and George knows there's something there, but he can't get their attention. And so he thinks to bring in Eric Clapton, and Clapton's first response is, no way, I'm not coming into the Beatles. Are you kidding me? I know you've had other musicians, but you've never had another guitarist. And George says, no, everyone will be happy. And John and Paul were big Eric Clapton fans. So when Clapton comes in, they're on their best behavior. And then the song transforms into this wonderful electric song.
Yeah.
And but it was a case of George having this song and trying to get the other Beatles interested in it and not having much luck. And so he said, okay, well, I'm going to bring in another guitarist, and that kind of got everyone excited.
So that being pretty close to the end of the Beatles until, well, they did Let It Be and Abbey Road, and then the Let It Be sessions, which are going to be coming out, we hope, soon. So there's going to be a lot that we can see. And I don't mean to jump to that point at this moment, but do you think the way it's going to be edited, they're going to really, it seems from what I've seen, just the Get Back piece, that they really are showing what's going to make you smile with the way the band was then?
So everything I've read and everything I've seen, and the few people who are a little bit more in the know, have said this is going to be a very positive slant on the Let It Be sessions. My worry, of course, with this, and even with the White Album box set that came out, which was fantastic, but it's a little bit of redoing history, right? Because you can't deny the fact that there were some real issues going on during those Get Back sessions. I mean, John was doing heroin, Yoko was there in the studio, George was really upset. So that was all there. So yeah, they can find the funny clips, and I'm really excited to kind of leave us with a better taste in our mouth, and maybe think about, like, okay, so they're brothers, they fight occasionally, but for the most part, they were all friends, and I think they were. Unfortunately, the original film caught all the bad stuff and didn't give you any of the balance. So I'm hoping that the Peter Jackson gives you the balance, but that's not to say that it was like the bad stuff didn't happen, because it did, and I think you have to recognize that.
So with Let It Be, I mean, they can't take a movie and remix it for an opinion version. They have to really just put it out and maybe put extras on it or other stuff. But so they do have to show the scene where he's bickering a little bit with Paul and those kind of things. But there are great moments in it. But yeah.
They have hundreds of hours of footage that was not used. So, one of the things about editing a movie is you can tell lots of different stories from the same footage. So this is going to be a different story. They are planning, as far as I've been able to see, they are planning to re-release the original again, but probably only when you buy the deluxe box set.
Right.
And I've heard the audio has been circulating in bootleg circles for a long time for all the cameras that were rolling all of the time. They're called the Nagra reels. And, there's a lot of just really awful, unenthusiastic jamming. And then there's some really fun parts and some humor and everything. So again, it's how you tell the story. And I think Peter Jackson's going to edit it in a way to tell a great story. But all the, obviously you can't create new footage. So it's going to be the footage that's there. And then I think we're finally going to get to see a fully realized Rooftop concert, which to me was, the whole Let It Be film is to get you to that concert.
Yeah, get you up on the roof. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm excited to see that and to hear all the tapes from that.
What's interesting now is we kind of deconstruct George here, and I really start thinking, all the firsts that he brought, that we talked about, the Indian and the foreign music and the sitar and the song is a social, comment, to Taxman, et cetera, that he was the first Beatle to break out with a #1 hit. And if you do the history from the other side, he's the last Beatle to have a #1 hit with Got My Mind Set on You. So you have this interesting kind of markers that he's laid down here. I don't know if they'll ever be broken by a member of the band at this point.
It may not. So here's a little trivia for you. See if you can get this one,
okay.
Joe. So there was a Beatle who had a #1 hit after George, but it wasn't by himself. Do you know who it was?
Oh, is it the one with Kanye?
Yeah, it's the Kanye Rihanna 4 or 5 seconds, and
right.
Paul got a #1, even though he has no idea what he really did on the recording. But yeah, so George Harrison, of course, with Got My Mind Set on You, that was the last solo #1 of a Beatle, and he had the first with My Sweet Lord.
And if you hear Gary Wright tell the story, it almost didn't happen. They were just warming up, and they were happened to play this drum riff, and Gary says, "I just went in to Got My Mind Set on You," and George says, "What is that? I used to have that record," and they recorded it. So, give or take 10 seconds of somebody not doing something, and we may not have gotten that song.
So I tell the story in my Hard Day's Night lecture. Another first of Harrison was he was the first Beatle to visit America. He came to visit his sister Louise, who was living here. And while he was there, he went to the local record store to see if they had a Beatles album. And of course, this was before the Beatles were on Capitol. They were on VJ, and they didn't have any Beatles stuff. And but while he was there, he bought a bunch of albums. And one of the albums he bought was James Ray, because the Beatles had been covering If You Got to Make a Fool of Somebody from James Ray in their Cavern Act. Mm-hmm. And on that album was Got My Mind Set on You. So, and then here's another first. He was not only the first Beatle to visit America, he was the first Beatle to perform in America. He got up.
Let me figure that out now. You don't mean as before the Ed Sullivan Show?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah. All right. Does it have to do with Benton, Illinois, where he was visiting?
Yeah, it does. So while he was there, they went to see a band called the Four Vests, VESTS, Four Vests, and he got up on stage and played with them. So that was in 1960, I guess 1963, right? Summer 1963. So it was actually the day that She Loves You was released by Swan. So I think that was maybe September, October of 63, around then. So he was the first Beatle to actually perform in America too.
Wow, that's fantastic. And well, he certainly wasn't the last to perform, because Paul's been going crazy. But also coming up on an anniversary is the 30th anniversary of the Japan concert, 1991.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
which he did with Clapton.
With Clapton again. And it's interesting, when they released it, they didn't release the Clapton songs. I know he did Badge and some other stuff in those concerts. Man, I wish I had been a little more aware. It would have been a great road trip to go to Japan to see that show.
Yes. Yeah. And even there have been two big tribute concerts. There was the concert for George, and then there was George Fest.
George Fest
has been released on CD. And I have videos of those, but I would have loved to have been there, even for the tribute shows.
Wow.
And of course, Bangladesh, you got to talk about, when talking about George, you wouldn't have Live Aid and you wouldn't have Amnesty International shows and all of that without, Concert for Bangladesh. I mean, he really started that idea of a benefit concert with bringing in all of the special guests and so forth.
Really amazing when you think about all the things that he accomplished, and we've kind of glossed over the actual songs as well, because those are fantastic, and the ones that we mentioned. But let's talk about "Give Me Love." I mean, that was a #1 hit for him
Yes.
in '73, I believe, or '4, right in that period. Fantastic song.
Yes, a wonderful song. That album is great. But clearly, I mean, starting with All Things Must Pass, and definitely even more on Living in the Material World, is his Eastern philosophy and his religious beliefs are really coming out. Every song on that album is talking about faith in one way or another, except for the one song he wrote about all of the lawsuits flying around, Sue Me, Sue You Blues.
Right.
One of the songs on the album, Try Some Buy Some, he had given to another artist, Doris Troy, and basically took the same backing track and replaced it with his vocal for Living in the Material World. And, Give Me Love is a great pop song, really, really wonderful. There's some other really fantastic songs. I love The Lord Loves the One That Loves the Lord. Is that the title? The one that starts the second side. And there's some beautiful songs like That Is All, just such a beautiful, lovely, wonderful song. And they're songs that make you think, which is really interesting, I think one of the other things, sort of getting back to the Beatles, one of the other things which caused some friction is that the songs that George was starting to write in '68 and '69 and so forth were songs about religion, And even if they were kind of cloaked in a more palatable way, like All Things Must Pass, right? It wasn't hammering things over your head about Hare Krishna, but there were songs being, Beware of Darkness was written around that same time period. And I think maybe John and Paul might have been a little wary about, going too far in that direction for a Beatles album. And I think also caused a little friction.
And I think that Ringo has told the story when he was producing a song for him, he wanted to put Hare Krishna and all that in there,
Yes.
and that was interesting at that time. So what is the most important then aspect of George Harrison? Because we've touched on like 5 things that are just over the top. The first concert, benefit concert, the first #1, the final #1, the spirituality, the introduction of great themes and instruments. What would you say?
Well, it's hard to sum up just one thing, but certainly I would say the music, right? I mean, the classic songs that he wrote and contributed to the Beatles and to his solo career. I mean, the #1 stream song from the Beatles, at least last time I checked, Here Comes the Sun, not a Lennon McCartney song, right? And one song, I mean, if you had to pick one song to play that would would brighten up your day in the worst moments, or you're feeling great, you're feeling horrible, what is that song that's going to play that no matter what, it's going to make you feel good? It's Here Comes the Sun. It's remarkable. And the other song from that same album, Something, is such a romantic, beautiful song, really very well crafted, a fantastic arrangement. And he was kind of at his peak when the Beatles were breaking up. And so I think you got to credit him with music, and that sort of wraps in, the Eastern influence, the religious influence, the slide guitar, which he starts to play after the Beatles, all of that. But really the songwriting, I think, is where George really shone.
There's actually an interview clip where John Lennon is saying, we insisted that Something go out as an A-side, as the single, so instead of Come Together. But I mean, they both went out, obviously, but at that point. Do you think it was a sense of humor that George released Here Comes the Moon, and then he did also a song, I Can't Help This Guitar Can't Help From Crying,
Yeah. I think yes, and I think some of the songs on Cloud 9, like When We Was Fab, definitely taking the piss out of the Beatles. But even songs like what was I just going to say? This song, the song he writes about being sued. He was sued for copyright infringement for My Sweet Lord, that he'd stolen that from He's So Fine, and he lost that case.
Yeah.
Well, he writes this song about, this song that's all about that, and then he does a music video of him in court, and it's hysterical. So, back to the Monty Python thing, I mean, out of, his sense of humor was a big part of his songwriting and a big part of his life. I mean, he the Traveling Wilburys, that was, let's get together, have fun, and have a few jokes. And those songs are very funny and largely crafted by George. So his sense of humor really important with him.
Yeah. And what I love about your deconstructing lectures is, the little facts that we didn't know about, that you toss out there. And what was I going to say? Oh, I haven't seen you do a Wilburys yet, but they've told the story that they're in the garage and they're looking around for something, and there's a box that was shipped and it says "Handle with Care," and they decide,
Right.
Oh, that's a good song.
Yeah.
And then you've got that power group in the garage there with Dylan and Jeff Lynne and Petty and George. Yep. And Insane, and then they pull that off.
Yeah. And they do it in a way that, as again, from everything that I read about the Wilburys, it was done without egos. They all admired each other, from Roy Orbison to Tom Petty, and they all admired each other. And to get Dylan to do that, to be part of that, I mean, that was George. George, yeah. Dylan loved George Harrison. I mean, they wrote songs together. Dylan appeared at George's at Bangladesh, and when it came time for the Wilburys, I mean, I would have thought Dylan would be the least likely person to want to do something like that, but he got into it in a huge way. So that's the friendship with George.
And the other thing about that song is they each take a solo line, vocal, and I didn't mention Roy Orbison.
Right.
He does a line reminiscent of one of his songs, and Petty and everybody, and that I think is my Wilburys. The end of the line and that one are my two favorites.
Yeah, great songs. Both those albums are just great. And again, albums designed to bring a smile to your face. There's not a down moment on those albums.
And of course, Volume 1 and Volume 3 is how they're released.
Yeah. I never forget when Volume 3 came out, I was so upset that how did I miss Volume 2? It just like, I love these guys. And then I figured it out, of course, but yeah.
Well, it's great having you on the show. Where can people catch up with you? Deconstructing the Beatles or BeatlesLectures.com, but tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Yeah, so I've been doing, as you mentioned earlier, a Fab Four Masterclass. Every month, Kenneth Womack and I have been moving through the history of the Beatles and doing kind of a Deconstructing the Beatles lecture, but with Ken's vast amount of Beatles input, some great stories from him. We've built a whole community of people. Every month we meet, and you can find out more about that. Just search for Fab Four Masterclass. And then Deconstructing the Beatles, I have 2 new videos coming out. They're hopefully going to appear in theaters, whatever theaters are left, or maybe virtual in the spring. That's Deconstructing Hard Day's Night and Deconstructing Help. All the other stuff is available from my website on DVD. And I'm hoping to be doing some live shows by summer. We'll see what happens, but I'm hoping to get back out there and meet some people.
Yeah, I think that we're starting to book some dates in pencil in the future here,
Yes.
With the Flower Power Cruises and the 70s Rock and Romance Cruises, and so many of those that maybe we'll get a chance to hang out and have dinner and throw back some stories. I can learn a few things from you. I can pick your brain a little bit.
Absolutely.
All right, man. It's been fantastic. George Harrison, we're going to celebrate his birthday, and then later on this year, we've got some anniversaries to mark. But how should people mark George's birthday, even if it's not on the day?
Oh, boy. I think they should listen to Harrison music. They should watch Life of Brian. They should, put on Abbey Road or the Wilburys or All Things Must Pass, and maybe even pull up the Concert for George, because just to see all of these wonderful artists, from Ringo and Paul McCartney to Clapton to Tom Petty to coming out and giving their tributes to it's great to see.
I remember one moment from the Concert for Bangladesh when Ravi Shankar is playing, and everybody starts applauding, and he says, "Well, that was the warm up, the sound check or whatever."
Yeah. Well, it was again another amazing thing for him to feature Ravi Shankar at his concerts.
So many layers to George. We could do a couple of hours on him, but I'm very grateful to have you on this little kind of video podcast and on Beetle Brunch. And so hope you'll stay safe over there. I know looks like you've grown a beard to ward off any COVID that would come in.
Just for a couple more days.
Instead of a mask. So
exactly.
All right, brother.
Exactly.
Well, you're looking good. It's great to be with you. Thanks for
always a pleasure, Joe. Anytime.
Okay, thanks for doing this.